Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordy and Glory video. In today's episode, I'm going to be going through a pure infantry army list that I've been having great success with. One of the main reasons that I'm making this video is to help out my fellow pure infantry guard commanders. With the loss of conscripts and some of the other tools that we really used to rely upon in the old codex, it has been kind of tricky figuring out how to use the new codex in a pure infantry guard capacity. I'm hoping that people will be able to use this video and this army list to point them in the right direction and help them get their legions out on the tabletop once more. However, this video isn't just for the Longbeards, it's also for the new guard players as well. I know that a lot of new players get into the guard as a faction because they want to recreate that World War I vibe in space. Over the top, fixed bayonets, forwards for the Emperor. I get it. But I also know that the guard has a lot of options to pick from, and it can be tricky to know where to start. So if you are a new guard player and you're in it for the long haul and you want to collect this big horde of infantry, then please feel free to use this list as an inspiration for your own army. But without further ado, let's crack on with today's episode and dive into the video. So the first thing that I want to talk about before we get into the list itself is go over how guard infantry lists work and how they operate on the tabletop. The main advantage of a big horde army is that it can play the objective game very well. In terms of primary objectives, you're going to have a lot of objective secure bodies that can move onto the primary points into the middle of the board, hold them, lock them down, and score yourself lots of points, and by holding this objective, denying them to your opponent. Infantry horde armies are also good at scoring secondary objectives. You pick ones that don't rely upon you killing stuff and instead doing actions either in table quarters or on objectives. For example, with an infantry horde army, you'll have plenty of bodies to do things like boots on the ground or engage in all fronts, just moving those forces into every part of the board and getting lots of points for doing so. But as I mentioned, you're focusing on objectives and not so much on killing power. You do still need killing power. You can't just go in there with just bodies and no guns, because 40k is a very lethal game, and even if you do go for as many boots on the ground as possible, if you can't do damage to the enemy, you'll find yourself running out of bodies fairly quickly. To this end, your army is going to be made up of two distinct parts. The first part is going to be your main force of infantry, what I like to call the line bodies or the meat. These guys are not designed to do damage. This part of your army is designed to move on to objectives, take the ground, put pressure on the enemy, get into the center of the board, start brawling, start messing with your opponent. Their main job is to keep pushing forward, keep trying to take those objectives. The meat part of the list is going to take up the majority of the models. That is going to be the bulk of your force. And the reason for this is they're going to be taking the majority of the casualties. They're the ones that are on the front line, pushing in, contesting the objectives, and getting up close and personal with your opponent. They're the first forces that your opponent is going to see, and they are going to be the first forces that your opponent is going to need to deal with if he wants to have any hope of trying to play the primary game. The second part of the force is going to be the smaller part, but it is just as important. These are going to be the damage dealers, also known as the potatoes. The main point of this part of your army is to do as much damage to the opponent as possible. They're still going to have a lot of models involved. I mean, we're running pure infantry, everything's got a lot of models involved, but their main job is to do damage to the enemy. This serves two very important functions. Firstly, it's going to mess up your opponent's plans because he's going to be losing models. The more models that you can take off your opponent, the more damage you can do to him, the less options he has and the less ways he has to play the game. It also indirectly provides more durability to the rest of your army. If you're able to do damage to your opponent's army and you're able to kill models and take them out of the game, then that means he has less guns, less knives that he's able to throw against your forces and kill your models with. By killing his models, you're reducing his firepower, which protects more of your models. So with these details in mind, Now let's take a look at the list. So the first thing to go over is the detachments and the doctrines. Now, I have chosen for this list to take 2 battalions. The reason that I've chosen 2 battalions over a brigade is because I would rather spend the CP tax than spend the points and models tax. For me, I want every point in this list to be going towards fulfilling those 2 principles that we talked about: damage dealing and pushing forward onto the enemy objectives. I don't want to be having any fat in this list. I don't want to be having any tax units. I need everything to be pushing forward and being as efficient as possible. And in addition to this list isn't very CP hungry. It uses 1 or 2 fairly consistently every battle round, but you're going to regenerate those as part of playing a Battleforge match play game. As for the regimental doctrines, I decided to go with Swift as the Wind and Heirloom Weapons. I chose Swift as the Wind because I'm running an infantry army, and traditionally that's kind of slow and you've got to foot slog it across the board. Every extra inch of movement that I can get out of this army is really, really important. Over the course of 5 turns, that's going to give me an extra 5 inches. That's almost an additional full turn of movement. Having that extra inch is often the difference between being able to make it onto an objective and not being able to make it onto an objective. And the reason I chose Heirloom Weapons is that in an infantry army, you typically don't have the really long range guns that you find on your tanks. Those things that have got a 36, 48, or even a 72-inch range. Instead, you're going to find that the majority of your weapons are going to have a 12 or 24-inch range. Now, being able to add an extra 4-inch range on all of your guns is a really big deal. It means that you're able to snipe at the enemy from further away with some long range shots, or it means that you can get into rapid fire range a bit easier. Or if you're running a lot of melter guns, spoiler alert, we are running a lot of melter guns, it means you can get into melter range even easier. Little side note / tangent, let me just go down this melter gun rabbit hole for a moment, guys. Normally, a melter gun has a 12-inch range and the model holding it has a 6-inch movement, which means in total, you have an 18-inch threat range. But thanks to Swift as the Wind giving me an extra inch on my movement and Heirloom Weapons giving me plus 4 inches on my weapon range, actually means that the threat range of my melter guns is 23 inches. Now that's really good because it means that I can threaten the middle of the board with lots of high strength, high AP firepower straight from the get-go. Makes it much harder for my opponent to just bum rush me, because if he does, I'm just going to melter gun the crap out of him. Moving on from detachments and doctrines, we've got relics and warlord traits. Now, I have taken 2 relics and I've taken a warlord trait in this army. The relic that I've taken is the Death Mask of Alonius Pius, and the reason I've taken that is I will be fielding a Dreadnought squad in this army. A Dreadnought, for those of you that don't know, is where you take a Cadian command squad, you add Naught Dead Dog to it, you add the Death Mask of Alonius Pius to it, and you essentially create an unkillable command squad that's pretty good in combat and great for holding objectives. So I've actually done a full video on this. If you want to go and check it out, just type into YouTube Mordian Glory Dreadnought. It'll take you through the full details. But all you need to know for this video is that it's really, really, really hard to kill. The second relic I've taken is the finale of the Nemedesh First. It is the big bullshit banner. I never leave home without it. It's there to really boost up the killing power of my damage dealers. Speaking of boosting my damage dealers, I have spent a CP pre-game to give my Militarum Tempestus command squad the Drill Commander Warlord trait. This allows all of my Scion squads within 6 inches of the unit to get maximum shots from their rapid fire weapons at full range, rather than having to get into half range. So for example, if I have a rapid fire 1 hotshot lasgun, normally that would get 1 shot at 24-inch range and 2 shots at 12-inch range. Thanks to Drill Commander, it gets 2 shots all the time. With the extra battalion and those 3 relics and warlord traits, it does mean that I start the game with a mighty 0 CP. But as I said at the beginning of the video, this list does not rely on CP to work. It is okay with generating 1 a turn as per the match play rules and using those as and when it needs it. And after all that, let's finally get into the units themselves. So as I mentioned earlier, I will be taking a Cadian command squad and turning that into a Dreadnought. This is the unkillable command squad. The purpose of this command squad is to advance forward with my main infantry wave. Traditionally, you tend to try and husband your officers and be a little bit more careful with them and not have them exposed. But the Dreadnought wants to be up close and personal in the thick of the fighting. There is two very important reasons for this. Firstly, if shots are going into your Dreadnought, they're not going into your other line infantry, and your Dreadnought can take the damage. It's fine. Like, I have had full Dark Elder armies unload onto the Dreadnought and not kill any of the models. They damaged them, but they didn't kill any of the models. I've also had Custodes go in, twirling their halberds, and just bounce off. It can take the damage. And so for every shot that is going into the Dreadnought, your line infantry aren't getting hurt as much, which means more meat to push onto the objectives. I tend to find a really weird thing happens with the Dreadnought. Your opponent starts shooting it, and rather than going, oh, I'm not going to kill this, I'll move on to other stuff, a lot of players go, right, I really need to kill this thing. They almost get tunnel vision, which is great for you because you want them to shoot it, but it's not good for them because it means they're not killing the things that are going to be scoring you points, which are your infantry squads. The other HQ choice you've got are a Tempestus command squad, 2 Cadian Castellans, and a Primaris Psyker. Now, the Primaris Psyker is there to cast Night Shroud on the Dreadnought, giving it trans hit. It's also there to score you some psychic secondaries and open up some options for you. Sometimes you won't need to be boosting the Dreadnought up. Sometimes it'll be able to tank the damage that is coming its way without having trans hit on it. And there'll be games when your opponent doesn't have a Psyker and you can just happily Warp Ritual in the middle of the board or Psychic Interrogate some of their characters. The Cadian Castellans are there to hand out reroll ones to hit in 6-inch bubbles, fairly straightforward. They're not there to get into combat or anything like that. You literally want to form a lot of your infantry around them in 2 big death balls and have them just handing out reroll ones to hit and orders at the same time. The Tempestus command squad is there to form part of your Scion Death Ball. I have done a quick tactical on that, so feel free to check it out. But in case you've not seen it, essentially you take 3 squads of Scions, you put them around a drill commander Tempestus Prime, who's got a finale of the Nemedesh first, and you have a ball of like 100 shots that can just ignore any to hit modifiers. Your opponent doesn't get any feel no pains, he doesn't get any wound caps, and you're just putting out so much DACA that it just melts the face off anything. It's a really, really effective combination, and it forms about half of your damage dealers in this list. Now, speaking of damage dealers, we're actually going to go through the elites before we go through the troops. Now, I've already mentioned that you're going to want 3 Tempestus Scion squads. These are going to form part of your Scion Death Ball. Now, you're going to want to equip those guys with 2 volley guns and 2 plasma guns in each squad. The reason for that is they're all rapid fire weapons, so they can take advantage of the Drill Commander Warlord trait really effectively. The next half of your damage dealers is the Kazakin. You're going to want 3 squads of these. They're going to be 10-man squads. Should have said it before, the Tempestus Scions are all 10-man squads as well. But the Kazakin are going to be 10-man squads with 2 melter guns, 2 plasma guns. Sergeant's going to have a Hotshot Lad's pistol. You're going to have a Voxcaster in there, Hotshot Sniper, and the rest of the guys are just going to have rifles. Now, sadly, your Kazakin don't get to take advantage of the Drill Commander Warlord trait like your Scions do, but they still put out a heck of a lot of firepower. Kazakin are just one of the strongest units in the book, and the fact that you can just load up so many special weapons into them is really, really nice. You're going to want to pair these 3 units of Kazakin with your other Cadian Castellan. So you can imagine now you've got these 2 death balls. You've got 1 death ball, which is the Tempestus Command Squad, a Cadian Castellan, and 3 units of Tempestus Scions, and you've got another death ball, which is 3 units of Kazakin with a Cadian Castellan. In terms of the warrior elite abilities for these Kazakin, it's kind of up to you. I have been taking mine, 1 with brutal strength, 1 with elite sharpshooters, and 1 with veteran guerrillas. The reason I've done that is brutal strength allows me to move and shoot and not worry about heavy weapons. I do have a sniper rifle in there, which is a heavy weapon. Also, I might want to do first rank fire, second rank fire if I'm facing a horde army. So again, that's an advantage there. The elite sharpshooters means I get a free reroll on the squad. That's just always useful. Often I use that on a melter gun or to stop a plasma gun from missing if it gets a 2. And then the veteran guerrilla ones is pretty nice as well, because it means that your opponent doesn't get cover if you're within 18 inches. And because you're rocking things like melter guns and plasma guns and stuff, you're going to try and get up close and personal with these guys. So you're more often than not going to be taking advantage of that. What you've got to remember is that your Kazakin do get your regimental doctrines. So all of those melter guns are 16-inch range. Those plasma guns have got a 14-inch range, rapid fire. So it does actually mean that whilst they don't get drill commander for extra shots at long range, they tend to get into rapid fire range fairly quickly anyway. And that means they can really start laying the firepower down. So you've got these two death balls that are full of elite infantry. It's putting out loads and loads of damage. But now let's go and take a look at the guys that are pushing forward into the enemy guns. Let's take a look at the pure bloody infantry. The bulk of this force is going to be made up of 12 squads of Death Corps of Krieg. Now, I know what you're thinking. In fact, I know what you're about to try and type in that comment section down below. You're thinking, Mordian Glory, why aren't you taking Caden shock troops? They're cheaper and they do more damage. Both of those things are true, but both those things are not what I'm after for my troop section. What I'm after for is durable bodies that can push onto the objective and they have enough firepower so that the enemy can't ignore them. Death Corps of Krieg get two really important abilities that make them perfect for this job. Firstly, they get inbuilt mini transhuman. What that means is they can never be wounded on a 1 or a 2. Anything that shoots them, it could be a volcano cannon, can only wound them on a 3 or better. They also get an upgrade for a Death Corps Medipack. And what that Medipack allows you to do is ignore the first failed save every single turn. Doesn't matter if it's a bolter round, doesn't matter if it's a las cannon round. The first time that you fail a save on that squad, each turn, the damage just gets reduced to 0. The guy doesn't die. The medic sticks his legs back on. Now, by running 12 squads of Death Corps, that means that potentially you could be ignoring 12 wounds a turn. Now, realistically, your opponent's not going to target all 12 squads from the start of the game, but they are likely to be targeting 4, 5, or even 6 of them from turn 1 onwards, because you're going to be pushing out into the board, taking those objectives right, which means that every single turn, more than likely, you're going to be ignoring 6 wounds. Over the course of the game, you're going to be ignoring 30 wounds. That's like you've had 3 extra squads of infantry on the board. What's also important to remember is that you can issue the take cover order to your infantry, which gives them light cover. And if they're already in light cover, they get dense cover. On terrain heavy boards of competitive Warhammer 40k, you'll be surprised at how easily you're going to get both parts of that order. When you add all this up together, you have an infantry squad that is -1 to hit, mini transhuman, and also 4+ armor save, and if it fails to save, it ignores the first wound. The 4+ save and the -1 to hit makes you very resistant to small arms fire. The mini transhuman and the medic makes you very resistant to big guns. I'm not just saying this based on theorycraft. I have taken this army list into battle 6 times. It has won every single game. Every single one of those games, my opponent came flying in thinking he was going to pick up loads of guardsmen, and at the end of turn 1, every single one of them said the same thing. Wow, I didn't do as much damage as I thought I was going to. Krieg infantry are deceptively tough, and I cannot recommend them enough. If you need a body of infantry to get onto objectives and brawl in the middle, Death Corps Krieg have got you covered. My recommended loadout for each one of these Death Corps Krieg infantry squads is to take 2 melter guns, swap the plasma gun for a Vox caster, and then give the sergeant a bolter. The 2 melter guns are going to give you some serious punch in each squad, and it makes the Death Corps Krieg a credible threat. If your opponent doesn't clear your Krieg squads out and starts going for your damage dealers, then your Krieg squads have enough firepower to become the damage dealers. I mean, no one wants to leave 24 melter guns unmolested in the middle of the board. That's just a recipe for disaster for almost any army. We stick the bolter on the sergeant because you could give him a pistol and a chainsword. You don't want to bother paying for the power sword. The reason is that he's never going to win combat anyway, so you might as well add to the firepower of the squad. And don't forget that if you give take aim to this squad, that bolter suddenly starts hitting on 3s and it starts being AP -1. That's actually a pretty good weapon. So that's the list, but how do you use it on the battlefield? Well, let me take you through my advice for how you play the first 2 turns with this army. When it comes to deployment, you're going to want to try and deploy as much of this force behind line of sight blocking terrain as possible. Now, you're going to have a lot of infantry. It's going to be tricky to hide them all. The most important units to protect are your 3 Kazakin squads and your 3 Tempestus Scion squads. They might have carapace armor, but at the end of the day, they're toughness 3 infantry. If you start those guys out exposed, the enemy's just going to pick them up and you're going to lose a really important part of your army. So get your elite infantry tucked away, nice and safe. If there's any room left over after that, cram as many Death Korps Krieg squads in as possible. But anyone else that's left out, just get them what cover you can. But if you can't, don't worry about it too much. There's always going to be some infantry you can't hide. And so there's always going to be some guys that have got to die first. Now, moving on to turn 1. If your opponent gets turn 1, that's not the end of the world. He's going to move out. He's probably going to do some damage to those squads that you couldn't quite hide away. And then it's going to come over to you. And you're going to basically just push forward with everyone. Start making a beeline for those mid-board objectives. I tend to have my Scions sort of sit on my home objective because they've got the 24-inch range where they can get the fire angles they need to and shoot things from maximum DACA from maximum range anyway. And then I tend to use my Kazakin to go down one flank, try to secure one of the mid-board objectives that's in no man's land in the middle. And then I tend to have all of my Death Korps Krieg just push forward and go for as many objectives as possible. Just cover as much of the board as you can. You're trying to put pressure on every objective possible because that is either going to force your opponent to try and spread himself thin to counter you, or he's going to leave some of your forces just sitting on primary objectives, scoring away, and there's nothing he can do about that. Either way, it's good for you because you're either going to be scoring points, or you're going to be making your opponent play your game. Now, if your opponent went first, and they were very aggressive and they pushed out into the middle of the board and they've sat on lots of objectives and you can draw line of sight and you can get into range with all of your nice long range melter guns and stuff straight away, then I recommend your go-to order for turn 1 to be take aim. You might want to do some moves here and there, but if you get the opportunity to hit your opponent hard turn 1 because he has either A, vastly underestimated how much damage guard infantry can do because he thinks it's all down to the Russes, which you don't have in this case. Or B, he has forgotten that you've got heirloom weapons and swift as the wind, so your range is actually quite good. Then you just push out and you start hammering him turn 1. Just do as much damage as you can turn 1. That's going to put you in a great position, okay? However, if you can't get into range with many of your weapons and if your opponent has been successful at being able to hide lots of his units out of line of sight behind some obscuring terrain in the middle of the board, or you went first, so your opponent is well hidden, and you've got to make the first move, in that case, go for take cover on as many people as possible, because you're just needing to increase your durability. Because if you went first, and you've got to move out and expose yourself first, and you've got to make that first move, you might as well, and you're not going to be able to do any damage to the enemy anyway, you might as well just take cover on everyone and boost your durability. It means he's going to, when he comes out and says, it's like, oh yes, there's all these guys on the middle of the board, I can smash them, he's probably going to bounce off you a lot more than he expected to. Likewise, if you went second, but your opponent's been very good at playing it cagey and making use of the terrain, so you can't get very many good angles, you need to take cover on your guys because there's going to be a brawl turn 2. He's not going to be cagey 2 turns in a row. He's not going to be able to afford to because if he plays cagey 2 turns in a row, you just start swarming them objectives. So he's going to come in turn 2 and try and mess you up. And again, you need to be durable. You need to be able to take that first crunch. Now, going into turn 2, more often than not, more than likely, it's going to be crunch time. Your opponent is going to come into you and do as much damage to you, and it is your job to do the same to him. At that point, get everyone into the fight, go all in, get all your guns into range as possible, get lance out to as many as possible, and do take aim. Try and smash him turn 2. If you do enough damage turn 2, it will leave him reeling and it will put you in the lead. Now, if for some reason your opponent doesn't come for you and he plays a bit cagey and indecisive and he doesn't move on to those middle objectives, then you are in a great position. Move on to every objective you can do with as many infantry as possible. Try and get 20 or 30 infantry on all the objectives and tell them to take cover. Dig in. Because you can happily sit there digging in turns 3, turns 4, turns 5, and just scoring. And it's up to your opponent to try and dig you out. I have to be honest though, I've never seen that happen. Every single game that I've used this list, all 6 of them, it's been crunch time turn 2 because your opponent realizes how many bodies you're going to start flooding those objectives with, and he has to try and thin them out. But it's kind of a trap because if he does come in and crunch you, you can absorb it with your durable guys, and then you can smash him with all of your special weapons. So that's the first couple of turns, and that should give you a good idea of how this list plays. It's not afraid to take casualties. It can take a beating, but if your opponent makes his move, you get to counter him with a blistering amount of firepower. Now, there is one thing that I haven't covered yet, which is secondaries. We've been talking all about the primary game, but what about the secondary game? You are going to want to take boots on the ground because you've got loads of infantry and you should be able to get 3 or maybe even 4 points on that pretty much every single turn. You can easily get into 2 to 3 table quarters every single turn with this list. You've got the bodies. You could just move someone over there. You can afford to throw a squad away if it gets you an extra victory point. At the same time, you can use your Dreadnought Cadian command squad with the flag to move into the middle of the board and start scoring a victory point every single turn. A lot of people forget that boots on the ground has a second part to it. They just think, oh, it's like engage with infantry. No, you get a command squad with the flag into the middle of the board. You score a point every single turn. The reason that's so important is then when your opponent learns that, he's like, oh, well, I've got to try and kill that Dreadnought then because it's scoring you points. But he can't kill the Dreadnought. It's almost unkillable. And if he puts everything into killing it, then you're scoring points elsewhere and you're just doing so much damage to him because the rest of your army is unmolested. So that's why you take boots on the ground. The next objective that you're going to take with this is going to be Inflexible Command. It's an easy 14, 15 points every game. You're going to have a Vox cast on every squad. You've got 2 command squads. They can easily cover most of your army. And where you don't have coverage, you've got 2 more Cadian Castellans running around able to get within range of them. So no matter how it works, you're going to have people in range. I tend to find that my Tempesta command squad is naturally within 6 inches of the Scions because they're all crowding round him for the drill commander. He is then happily within 24 inches of about half of my other infantry with the Voxcasters. I then have my Cadian Castellan around my Kazakin. So they're all within range of him, which is great. And then I have my Cadian command squad, my Dreadnought, which is in range of the other half of my infantry with their Voxcaster. So it's very easy to pick up 2 points a turn with that. And of course, every unit in your army should be under the influence of orders every single turn, one way or another. So you might not score it turn 1, especially if you went first and you had to make the first move, but you should easily be able to kill an enemy unit whilst under the influence of an order. So that should be an easy 3 points every single turn after that. The last one that I like to go for is Special Orders because it's, in my experience, an easy 10 points. You have got so much infantry and so many officers that you're going to be controlling at least one of the no man's land objectives every single turn. If you're playing a 6 objective mission, I have personally picked up 15 points on Special Orders, no problems using this list on a 6 objective mission. If you're playing a 5 objective mission, you'll probably pick up 10. Either way, you're looking at getting an easy 40 out of 45 secondary points with this army. Combine that with the fact that this list is literally designed to dominate on the primary points as well. And every game that I've used this list, I haven't scored less than 90 victory points. In fact, my average is 93 over those 6 games. But that is the list. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Would you swap those Krieg out for shock troops anyway? What would you do with the points saved? Is there any other part of the list that you would change? Get it down in that comment section. I would love to hear your feedback. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure you smash that like button and subscribe to never miss an episode. If you really enjoyed today's video or you found it particularly helpful and you want to see more content like this, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. One of the big perks of being a channel member or Patreon supporter is you gain access to the Mordian Glory Discord, which is an online community of over 700 active members. It is always busy in there. It's always popping off. There's everything to talk about, from memes, hobbying, painting, tactics, army lists, and not just Imperial Guard stuff. We have a growing community of people that collect other factions as well. So if that sounds like a whole heap of fun, or maybe a useful resource for you to draw upon, we do have a lot of experienced players in there, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. And I'd like to take a moment to say a big thank you to all of our latest channel members. So thank you to Wrath of Constantine, Wyatt Watson, Darius, Carl, Beowulf 8991, Potato, Shangron, Chansey, Andrew, PJ, Alec, The Lonely Shepherd, Matthew, and Cappuccino. Thank you guys for doing your part. Thank you for becoming channel members. And I also want to do a shout out to the latest Patreon supporters as well. A big thank you to Harminder, Saber, Falcor, Eric, Samuel, Grand Admiral Thorn, Echo Marker, Potato Wrangler, Dan Dodge, and Ragnarockus. Thank you guys for your ongoing Patreon support. And last, but certainly not least, I would like to say a big thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are my war masters, the people that have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. And I just want to say a personal, heartfelt thank you to these guys, because they are a big part of what allows me to do the Mordian Glory channel full time. So a massive thank you to Bonbon Vert, Phil French, Ross Miller, Tekwal, Alex Dengal, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Sulphur Trombone, Diesel Fox, Tom Sutton, and of course, Sly Varney, the one-man super chatting army. Massive thank you to all of you guys. Your ongoing support is just so helpful. It makes a big, big difference. I hope you all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching. And of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.